previous examination, right? So as you can see here, this is the type of a question that you can also see in your paper, right? Probably that even we learned many things, right? In an essay paper, we are actually given a question which is has an importance, as also that it has generally a clinical implication when we select a particular question for an essay question, right? So that you can see there are altogether 4 or 5 parts in a one question, right? So that the relevant marks are mentioned in the paper as well. So that just assume that when you just see the paper, right, so that you have to concern about the mark which is allocated as well, right? Why I am saying like this, because you can guess what to what extent that you are going to write, right? So just look at the marks that are allocated, and with that you can have an own guess the depth that you should write, right? This may not exactly true for all questions, but you can have an idea about the content that we expect from you when you just look at the marks that are allocated for each question, right? So we will start the tutorial now, right? Can anyone tell me the question, please? We will move on to the first question now. Can you please read the question? Can anyone tell me the question, please? Can anyone tell me the question? Can you please tell me the question? I can't hear you. Shall I call a name then? Miss Sevwandi, can you please tell me the question? Who is this Sevwandi SLCD?
Yes, madam.
Okay. Please tell me the question, please.
Explain the following: the biochemical significance of feeding the newborn with breast milk.
Okay. So what are the things that you should write under this question, right? So first of all, that you have to think what you should write, right? So here that we are asking about the significance, right? Significance means always that we are concerning about the nutritive value, right? So whenever that you write something, right, it should be complete, right? Because you know that there are a number of nutrients that are provided by the breast milk, so that you have to have a small sketch in your mind in the terms that you should write as the answer, right? So when just as an example, right? So that you have to cover all the macronutrients, micronutrients, and also that special concerns or nutritive points related to the breast milk, right? So who is Miss Nimesha? Can you please read what you have written to as the answer? Nimesha 5526. Can you read the content? Read what you have written. Can you hear me? Then can Sandaruwan can read the answer.
Yes, madam.
Yeah, please read the answer.
Uh,
Doesn't matter, right? It should not be a
uh,
perfect one. We can discuss the answer later, right? I will give you the model answer, right? Just tell me what are the things that you have written already.
okay. Newborn has increased nutrient requirement due to high growth rate. Breast milk is adequate as a sole source of nutrient up to 4 to 6 months after birth. Uh, Efficiency of utilization of breast milk by newborn is 100%. And also breast milk clean and sterile. No need to processing. In correct temperature. Uh, Not only that, breastfeeding is essential for emotional satisfaction for both mother and baby. The breast milk secretes during first few days, known as colostrum. Colostrum has high vitamin A, sodium, calcium, protein than mature breast milk, but lower carbohydrate and fat content than breast milk. And secretory IgA and lactoferrin also contain. Uh, Energy source of mature breast milk is lactose. Uh, Oligosaccharide in the mature breast milk contribute to calories at low osmolarity, inhibit growth of E. coli and other harmful bacteria, stimulate the growth of bifidus factor, uh, and lactobacillus bifidus bacteria, and it maintain microflora, and lactobacillus bifidus fermentates lactose and more easily digestible coagulated milk particles produce. Uh, Regarding the protein in the breast milk, um, major protein in the mature breast milk is casein. Uh, Lactoferrin in the breast milk carries iron in a form that is easily to absorb, has antibacterial action, uh, high cysteine contain, and it is an essential amino acid for infant. Uh, Contain low phenylalanine. If it is high, cannot be metabolized and not good for brain metabolism. Uh, Regarding the fat, essential fatty acid, saturated fatty acid, triglyceride, and cholesterol are present due to presence of lipase. Fat is already digested. High cholesterol content in breast milk can child is able to tolerate high cholesterol in later life. Uh, Regarding the minerals, low mineral content, so lower renal solute, and it is beneficial for immature kidney. Uh, High calcium to phosphorus ratio increase the retention of calcium or reduce calcium excretion from the body. Regarding the vitamins, if the diet of the mother is good, breast milk is a satisfactory source of vitamin B complex.
Okay, can you all see my screen now? I have started screen sharing. Can you all see my screen? Can anyone tell me whether you can see my screen?
Yes, madam.
Okay, so we will go ahead, right? So according to the question which is given, the significance of breast milk for a newborn, right? So that all the practices or the feeding practices that are relevant to breast milk is not relevant to this question, right? Because we are asking about the significance of breast milk. That means you have to know that we are not actually considering about this emotional satisfaction and the advantages of not needing time for the preparation. These are not relevant to the answer, right? And we have not allocated even a single mark related to the feeding practices, right? So that you have to be very alert when you see this kind of a question, right? We have to talk only about the breast milk, not related to the feeding practices, right? So in giving marks as well, we have divided the marking scheme, the 30 mark, into pieces, right? So first of all, that we have allocated a particular mark for the nutritive points of colostrum, and then to explain the nutritive points of in relation to the carbohydrate, then for the proteins, lipids, and related to micronutrients, which includes the minerals and vitamins, and also the immunological aspects like the presence of immunoglobulins, which is considered as an important point, right? And also that we have given a free mark of 2, right, to give you in relation to a point that you have written but not in the marking scheme, right? So this is the structure of the marking scheme that we developed for this answer, right? So we will go ahead. This is actually related to the colostrum. Just look at the points that we are concerned, right? In the first that we have to tell that the breast milk is the ideal food for the newborn because of its biochemical uniqueness, right? You have to mention the early secretion as colostrum and the nutritive value, right? So for this part, it carries 5 marks, right? Important sources of immunoglobulins, right? The significance means that you have to write the significant point, right? Because you know that when we describe a nutritive point of any kind of a food, right, we cannot write all the things, right? What is our main concern is to provide the significant features in relation to the nutrition, right? The second point is high protein and balanced level of essential fatty acids, right? And also breast milk carbohydrate, right? It's the lactose as the chief sugar, right? So that these are the nutritive points, right, in relation to the breast milk, right? So we will go ahead, right? When we describe the carbohydrate component, that you have to know that the lactose is the chief sugar, right? It serves as an energy source, and also that with this with the presence of this lactulose in breast milk, that it will cause a number of favorable effects on the microflora in the intestine, right? What is the reason? What is the explanation for this? Because the favorable microflora in the intestine is dominated basically by this bifidus and the growth promoting factors like bifidus factors like lactulose, right? So that lactulose, which is present in breast milk, is having a good favorable or good effect on the microflora in the newborn, right? So that you have to write that point as well, right? And then we will move on to breast milk proteins, right? You have to mention that casein is one or the chief protein, right? And there are 2 things that you have to tell in addition to the mentioning of this chief protein. What are these 2 things? You have to talk about this methionine to cysteine ratio, which stands for less than 1, right? What is the importance of having this kind of very low methionine to cysteine ratio? Because you know that generally that cysteine is not an essential amino acid, right? It is not an essential amino acid for an adult, right? But you, when you describe the status in a newborn, right, cysteine becomes an essential amino acid. What is the reason? Because in the body, that right, methionine is converted into cysteine with the presence of this cystathionase enzyme, right? With this enzyme is not very functioning in a newborn, right? That is why cysteine has become a essential amino acids, particularly for newborns, right? So having a very good amount of cysteine in breast milk is an advantage, right? And also that you have to tell about these two amino acids, phenylalanine and tyrosine. So that when you just see the content in these two amino acids in breast milk, they are in low amount, right? What is the advantage of having low amount of this phenylalanine and tyrosine? Because you know that these two amino acids are not effectively metabolized inside of an infant, right? So that it can enters to the blood-brain barrier. It can crosses through the blood-brain membrane, and this brain development and retardation of this brain activities can be occurred with high amount of phenylalanine and tyrosine, as these can be easily cross this blood-brain barrier, right? So that when it is really beneficial to have low amount in these two amino acids in breast milk, right? So this is about the breast milk protein, right? And then we will move on to breast milk lipids, right? So in order to describe this lipid part, that you can get 5 marks in the exam, right? According to this given marking scheme, right? So that in breast milk lipids, you have to tell what are the main lipids that can be found in breast milk, like for an example, free fatty acids, triglycerides, right? And these diacyl glycerols, right? And also phospholipids, right? What is the important fact related to this fat component in breast milk? Because you know that the lipase enzyme is also present in breast milk, right? What is the advantage of this presence of lipase in breast milk? Because lipase, you know, this enzyme is act on lipids, right? So that when the enzyme as itself present in a given food item, that it starts already the initial digestive process, right? So that when it is administered to the newborn, right, it is very easy to proceed further, because partially that the lipids are digested within the food as itself, right? This has a advantage. And also, if you want, you can write the presence of high amount of cholesterol in breast milk is also considered as an advantage, even though that it is not given in the slide, right? So what is the advantage of having a considerably high amount of cholesterol in breast milk? Because you know that when a person is exposure to a high level at the initial stage of their life, right, even in the adult life as well, that we can predict that this person can tolerate good amount of cholesterol, which may be a good point in later stage of the life, right? You can take that point as well, right? And in order to describe this lipid component, we allocated 5 marks, right? So that I'm just telling all the marks in order to have an idea about how about the marks distribution in a particular question, right? So then we can move on to vitamins and minerals. For both, for the description related to vitamins and minerals, you can get 5 marks, right? So in order to get the mark, you have to write about the basic vitamins that are present, right? And also the minerals, that you have to mention that all minerals are in low content, right? It has an clinical importance because that it results in a low renal solute load for the immature kidney, right? Because you know that all the digestive enzyme systems and kidney functions, they are not in well standard, right? They are still in the immature state, so that that with the presence of low content can be beneficial to the immature kidneys, right? And then the presence of these host resistant factors like IgA, IgG, and IgM, mentioning the three immunoglobulins that you can take 3 marks, right? And the remaining 2 marks are given to whatever the points that are correct in your answer, right? It's a free mark that if you have written something related to breast milk which is acceptable as the answer, you can score that final 2 marks, right? So this is the complete answer that we expect from you, right? And if you just, because that 2 marks is given because you know that we are talking about many binding factors, right? We can talk about the iron, right? And many other things, right? So that the 2 marks are given for any of the points that you actually, any of the point that the student is written in the answer, right? So this is the formal answer that we expect from you, right? Make sure that you write all the important points, right? Because you don't need to waste your time in writing all the things, because as I heard from you, right, the person who read the answer, he also mentioned about the feeding practices and the stuff, right? So don't write about it unless it is given as the question, like breastfeeding, right? Breastfeeding, that we should write them, but not for breast milk, right? So that restrict all the points, the nutritive points related to breast milk according to the question which is given, right? Then we will move on to the second part, right? Can anyone read the question with the answer, please? Can anyone read the answer? Can you please read the answer? Can this Manurangi read the answer?
Fiber is an important
Yeah.
content of the diet. Fibers consist of polysaccharides except for lignin. They provide no energy. There are two types, water soluble and water insoluble. Fibers add bulk to food, therefore increase satiety. This helps in weight control. Water-soluble fibers inhibit the enterohepatic circulation of bile. This increase bile excretion, reduce bile content in the body, increase use of cholesterol to provide bile, and reduces cholesterol level. Eventually, this prevent hypercholesterolemia. Water-soluble fibers increase viscosity of intestinal content and delay glucose absorption. This prevent hyperglycemia. Water-insoluble fibers absorb water and increase fecal mass. This prevent constipation by facilitating defecation. Also, this prevent colonic carcinoma and diverticulosis. Fermentable fibers increase calcium absorption. This is not good for pregnant and lactating women. Excess fiber can cause reduced digestibility and abdominal discomfort.
Right. So we will move on to the answer now. Right. I hope you all can see my screen. Can you all see the screen now?
Yes, madam.
Okay. So we will go ahead. Fiber is an important component in the diet. Look at the mark which is allocated to you. to this part, it's 20 marks, right? You can imagine the content that you should write when you compare the same with the first part, right? 20 means somewhat not an in-depth answer, right? So what are the things that you should write for this, right? Because when you talk about the nutritional aspect of fiber, basically the nutritive points are related to the soluble fiber, right? Soluble fiber is mainly involved in human nutrition, right? And particularly this soluble fiber is involved in carbohydrate and lipid metabolism, right? So how it is related in glucose metabolism, because you know that soluble fiber can absorb water, right, and forms a gel-like structure, increases the viscosity of the intestinal content, then delay in the gastric emptying rate, right? So what is the advantage of having this kind of delay in gastric emptying rate? Because that when we take a considerable amount of fiber into the diet, we don't have the feeling of hunger for a long period, right? So that it will reduce the intake of food, right? Then with the same reason that it can cause a delay in absorption of glucose, right? So actually when fiber is taken, right, all these metabolic processes are getting slow, right? So when we apply the same theory to glucose as well, right, it can delay the absorption of glucose so that it helps to decrease the postprandial glucose level, right? So thereby it improves the glycemic control, right? So you know that what is the importance of this postprandial glucose in order to maintain this glycemic control? Because you know that if the postprandial glucose levels are going high for a long period of time, right, there's a high chance of developing hyperglycemia and related conditions of diabetes, right? So when you just look at the pathogenesis of type 2 diabetes, right, it is the early mark or the early warning sign for developing diabetes mellitus is to have that kind of increased postprandial glucose level, right? So particularly the dietary fiber is recommended to people who are having the risk of developing diabetes and other chronic diseases, right? Because that it can slow down the postprandial increment in glucose, right, which will be ultimately helpful to the improvement in glycemic control, right? And also that this gastric emptying rate, as I said to you, it will increase the satiety and the time which is taken to intake food, and it will be good for weight reduction as well, right? How this weight reduction is involved, because you know that weight is an important phenomena when we talk about this insulin resistance, right? Because you know that when the people are getting fat and when the people are moving from the normal weight category to overweight and obese, right, the insulin resistance is actually developing, and it can be end up with the development of type 2 diabetes mellitus, right? So that is why it is needed to maintain a proper weight according to the given BMI, right? So that fiber has a significant role in maintaining a good weight for a person, right? And then we will talk about the cholesterol part now, interaction between soluble fiber and lipids, right? They can reduce the fluid movement, decrease the absorption of cholesterol, right? So it's a good point, because you know that the cholesterol absorption can be limited when the fiber is present in a diet, right? And also fiber inhibits the recirculation of bile acids in order to increase production of bile acids, and um, these bile acids are able to decrease cholesterol. Sorry, that this is a mistake, right? The arrow should be downwards, right? So that it helps to decrease the cholesterol level in plasma, right? And then action of colonic bacteria on dietary fiber produces short chain fatty acids, and they can be absorbed and utilized by the body, right? And short chain fatty acids are um, absorbed in the colon, and it can produce small amount of energy, and also helps to maintain the colonic integrity as well, right? So this is about all the nutritive points related to the fiber, right? And when distributing marks for this question, right, we have identified 4 main areas, right? For the involvement of fiber in carbohydrate, and carbohydrate, it stands for 5 marks, right? And also to maintain the good weight of a person, it stands for 3 marks. And then about the relationship of this fiber and lipid metabolism, 5 marks. And to describe the advantages of these short chain fatty acids, we allocated 5 marks for that, right? So this is the formal answer, and we were not actually very strict in giving marks within that particular big content, right? If it is sound well and if the points are correct, right? We didn't go for many in-depth descriptions related to this, right? So if the point is there, right, normally that a particular mark is given, or the mark which is given allocated is normally given, right? So this is about the fiber. Then shall we move on to the next one? Can you please read the question? Can anyone read the question? Can anyone read it? Who is going to read? Can this person read the question? Patirana 5562.
Yes, madam.
Okay, please go ahead. Just read the question and I will explain to you the answer, because that I should tell many things related to this type of thing, right? So that just mention the question and I will go ahead with the answer.
Explain the main considerations in planning a diet for a patient with chronic liver disease.
Right. So this is actually very common if you have gone through all the past papers, right? Explaining the main considerations in planning a diet for patients are very common, right? In all these question papers, just have a look at it, right? We have talked about this chronic liver disease, chronic renal failure, a person who is having diabetes, hypertriglyceridemia, an obese person, right? So that these are the different examples that you can see in past papers, right? So in all these question types, that you have to follow a similar way of writing. Why I am saying like a similar way? Because when whatever the disease condition which is appeared in the paper, right? So that you have to write what happens in that disease, right? Because you cannot write all the pathophysiological features related to that particular disease, right? We should write only the pathophysiological features where we can provide solutions from nutrition. Because as for an example, just take an example like type 2 diabetes, right? We cannot write the whole story of pathophysiology there, right? You have to identify the main pathophysiological features that you can address through the nutritional point of view, right? So that the analysis of the particular disease in terms of nutritional aspects is number 1, right? And second point is what sort of objectives or what sort of aims that should be fulfilled with the given nutritional support, right? So that for number of diseases, that point may be different, right? As for an example, if I take it as obesity, right? The obesity can be reversed with a proper nutritional aspect, right? But when you take an example like diabetes, right, we cannot reverse diabetes. It's true that we cannot, the patient cannot be reversed, right? The physiological, pathophysiological features cannot be reversed anymore. But the importance of providing an adequate nutrition is to maintain the normal levels as much as possible, right? Particularly when you talk about this early stage diabetes, it can be controlled and it can be actually prevent moving from the early stage to the second or the later stage, and also we can prevent or delay in complications that are associated with diabetes. Likewise, you have to provide the proper nutritional aim, right? So that it can be different from one disease to another, right? I have taken just an example, right? For diabetes, as in that way, right? And also just assume that we have a question related to renal failure, right? Renal failure also, we cannot reverse all these changes, right? Because that they are chronic situations. Whatever that we can actually, what should be our aim is to maintain the proper metabolic status in that patient, right? Not to reverse from the situation. It cannot be, and it is not possible, even though that it's kind of an hypothetical situation. And also with the proper nutrition, the pharmaceutical agents are more favorable on this patient, right? For number of diseases, that point is true, right? Let's summarize what we have talked up to now. You have to write about the disease, how it is happen, and what are the metabolic changes that are associated, and also with the proper nutritional aspect, what are the things that you should provide, right? And the third point that you have to write is the actual considerations in related to the diet, right? Just assume that you are talking about a diet, right? So that diet means always that it should be linked with the food items, right? Because just assuming that main consideration is not exactly related to the diet, but if the question contains this word diet, right? So that you have to write the consideration plus how you would achieve this with a suitable diet, right? When I explain this one, you will be able to learn in how to write it, right? Just remember the 3 points. These are the 3 things that you should write for any question in a similar way, or which shows the similar pattern, right? It can be with this CLD, CRF, diabetes as examples, right? Then we will move on to the question which is given in the tutorial question now, right? Main considerations in planning a diet for a patient with chronic liver disease, right? So what happens in chronic liver disease, right? So that you have to provide the answer. In a liver disease, liver is so important. What is the reason? Because it is the central or the metabolic, the main metabolic organ which regulates all metabolic processes, right? And also what happens in a chronic liver disease, because in a chronic liver disease, all the functioning number of cells are markedly decreased, right? And also that they are having different undernutritional problems as well, because these patients are having loss of appetite, right? And also there can be malabsorption of nutrients. What is the when you just describe the malabsorption, you know that all the glucose, the fat part, and also minerals, vitamins, all these metabolic pathways are governed inside of hepatocytes, right? If the hepatocytes are not in good strength, right, all these absorptive problems of nutrients will be taken place. And also there's another problem, as this is a disease condition. You know that when you just look at this BMR and the energy requirement, it is again obviously it is going to be increased, right? It has an increased metabolic requirement, right? So that these are the problems that are associated with a patient with chronic liver disease, right? So this is the introduction part. And for this kind of introduction, we have actually give altogether 8 or 10 marks in order to write about the consideration, before write about the consideration, the analysis of the disease status, right? And then we will have to provide solutions, right? And you can see another problems like increased energy requirement, right? The same point in describing the status, which is related to increased hypermetabolism and also decreased glycogen stores, right? And also there can be an increased protein requirement due to low intake of food, right? And also that problems are there because the glycogen stores are very poor, right? Because the functioning capacity of hepatocytes are getting low. So comparatively, that glycogen stores are very poor, right? So that it has the increased rate of gluconeogenesis from amino acids, right? That is why that the muscle protein breakdown is related with this kind of a patient, right? So it stands with this kind of aspect, right? So that these are come under problems, right? So that if you just look at the problems that are related to the micronutrients, right? Because that there can be a deficiency of fat-soluble vitamins, particularly vitamin D and A, because that these enzymes are not, these vitamins are not well absorbed by a patient with chronic liver disease, right? And also that particular calcium malabsorption is there, right? And it can be taken as another problem, right? Then we will move on to the dietary considerations, right? So basically we have to think about the energy. What is the reason? Because we mentioned several times the chronic liver disease patient, that obviously that that this person has a high BMR and high energy requirement, right? So when the word energy comes into the mind, what are the two nutrients that can provide energy? It's the carbohydrate and fat, right? Carbohydrate rich food is recommended. Generally, it is recommended to give more polyunsaturated fat and reduce the total fat through saturated fat, right? Because that even that this person does not have any problem in the lipid metabolism, right? But there is a tendency to develop other alterations, so that better to keep in mind that we should limit the saturated fat and providing more unsaturated fat in order to satisfy the energy demand, right? Because we can recommend this polyunsaturated fat, because you know that when we compare the energy value which is given from a carbohydrate and a fat gives more energy, right? So that we cannot omit that part totally, considering the bad effect of fat, right? That is why we can recommend the good fat term, the polyunsaturated fatty acids, right? And also there can be problems in the protein metabolism as well, since that there is an increased requirement for protein intake. It should be adequate, and we should provide increased proteins with high biological value, right? And the presence of all essential amino acids are also important, because you know that we should provide good quality proteins, right? So that all the essential amino acids should be come from the diet, so that it's a must to provide good protein diet for a patient having a chronic liver disease, right? And also because that in the question it is not given actually the status of this person, right? If the in end stage liver disease, like with the presence of hepatic encephalopathy, right? We should limit the protein intake, but it is always enriched with all proteins with high biological value, right? So this is about the protein part. Okay, then we will move on to another important point related to the branch chain amino acids. Right? Generally, these branch chain amino acids are used as an energy source because if you look at the biochemistry or the structure of this branch chain amino acid, branch means always that lots of carbon moieties are there, right? When you see a structure with lot of carbon moieties, that it's a way of producing energy, right? You know that from the very basic biochemistry, when carbon and oxygen atoms are there in a particular structure, that it can move towards to the metabolism, right? CH bonds, they can be if there is a breakdown of that particular bond, that a certain amount of energy can be released, right? And also that it can be helpful to the protein synthesis as well, right? So it is recommended to take branch chain amino acids, particularly for patients who are having chronic liver disease. Right? And then in addition to the macronutrients, we discussed about the proteins, discussed about the carbohydrate and fat. Then we should talk about vitamin D and A because you know that there's a malabsorption of these vitamins, right? Because of this functional mass is going to be reduced in a patient with liver disease, so that we should increase the intake of vitamin D, A, and also calcium containing food, right? So this is actually the complete answer, right? For small points, we allocated marks like 2 per each, right? So when you just write all these things, that you can easily check the full mark of 30, right? There is no doubt on it because if you just look at all these things, right? They are not that much difficult when you compare the same thing related to other sections as well, right? So that what is important is to maintain a good order, because that if you can maintain a good order in the answer, there is a lesser chance of losing your points, right? So keep in mind that you have to cover everything, right? So that you can have a own sketch in your mind when you start writing, right? Is this clear for you? Do you have any question to ask? If you have any question, you can ask it now. Is it fine? You got the answer, right? So that I advise you all to write the similar way of answers for all other questions that are mentioned in essay type questions in the paper, right? So better to take the nutrition question, because you can see in all these years we have not given anything new, right? When you just look at all these papers for the past few years, like for the past 5 years, right? We have not given a totally a new question for nutrition, right? Everything was circulated, right? And there are no new disease conditions were introduced to the paper exactly, right? If you just look at the objectives, you can see that all the disease conditions are listed there, so that you can have a small practice of writing the answer in a similar way. Now I have explained to you how you should write, so that you have to be alert with this pattern, right, in order to get a good mark for nutrition question, right? So shall we move on to the next last one now? Who is going to read now? Can Diniti read the answer, please? Can Diniti read the answer? Can Diniti Malisha can read the answer?
Yes, madam.
Yes, please. Okay.
The
Just
question
read
was
what you
given
have
as
written, right? Okay, just read.
describe the status of nitrogen balance in a patient with tissue injury. During tissue injuries, it creates a state of stress, and it's a catabolic phase. Um, the metabolic changes that occurs during this phase need to increase the supply of energy to the tissue, and it is important to limit the fluid losses. And the metabolic changes that occurs in this tissue injury depends on the severity of the injury, and the nutritional support is basically dependent on the electrolyte balance. In tissue injuries, the cortisol secretion is increased, and this hormone is responsible for protein catabolism, especially in muscle tissues, and due to this protein catabolism, lost from tissues which are affected. So the nitrogen excretion is increased, and because of that increased excretion, the nitrogen balance goes to the negative side, and with the nutritional support, the person can achieve the normal nitrogenal balance. But when reaching the normal nitrogenal balance, first with the nutritional support, it goes above, then it first reaches normal level and goes to the positive side, and then becomes normal. As this is a stressful condition, the catabolic processes are induced, and that effects of stress are they could be reduced by the nutritional support, but it's unable to eliminate them completely. Therefore, high energy protein supplements should be given, as the protein catabolism and so the patient should be given food with high protein value with all essential amino acids, and those some patients who have undergone surgical procedures like surgeries, they may go under malnutrition due to several reasons, because of their stress and loss of appetite and dysphagia and malabsorption, and
Okay, just look at the answer that we provided, right? Okay, status of the nitrogen balance in a patient with tissue injury, right? So that you have to talk only about the nitrogen balance, right? Don't write unnecessary things, right? You have to write particularly on nitrogen balance, and we are not considering all other things in a patient with tissue injury, right? So we can see the steps or the points that it contains. Tissue injury is characterized by hypermetabolism, accelerated gluconeogenesis, and increased fat oxidation, right? So with all these things, right, it can be considered as a energy requiring stage. And also that when you talk about the protein component in the body, we always use this nitrogen balance in order to represent the protein amount inside of the body, right? So that it is obvious that that the patient is in a negative nitrogen balance, right? So in a tissue injury, that the nitrogen balance can be affected by number of responses, including the inflammatory response and the metabolic response, right? We do not need to go for details, but just mention what are the main causes for having this kind of nitrogen imbalance in a patient with tissue injury, right? So just look at this inflammatory response, because you know that inflammatory response is governed through cytokinin signals, right? So from the basic biochemistry that you know, inflammatory responses are basically governed with cytokinin signals. So that when there is an increased production via stimulation of gut-associated lymphoid tissues, and locally in the wound tissue, there's an increased demand for proteins, because lots of cytokinins need to be resynthesized, right? They are in high use, right? So that there's a demand for proteins, and also that cytokinin signals favor in protein breakdown as well, right? So in order to have kind of a good breakdown, right, more protein should be there too, and also that it should accelerate the synthesis. That is why the protein intake should be increased, right, with respect to the requirement that is found in a patient with tissue injury. And then when we move on to this metabolic response, right, when you talk about this metabolic response, lot of catabolic hormones are involved, as you can see here in this slide. The glucagon, catecholamines, corticoids, right? Corticoids, they are all getting actually stimulated, right? Increased BMR, and also this also favors the breakdown of proteins in a state of low protein intake, right? So that when there is a poor protein intake, right, it may not be sufficient to maintain the body nitrogen equilibrium inside of the body, right? So we have identified main problems related to this tissue injury person. The first one is increased BMR. The second one is the increased breakdown of proteins, right? So that in dietary concerns, there in the question, it is not asked actually, right? But when you just out of the answer, when you just memorize all these things, right? When increased BMR or increased breakdown of proteins are there, right? We have to concern a good protein containing food plus high energy diet, right? Which is not needed to write here, because we are not asking about the dietary considerations. We just want to know about the analysis of the problem, like the status of the nitrogen balance, right? And also that in describing all these things, right, you have to know that there is an increased nitrogen excretion, right, which is straight away linked to the negative nitrogen balance, right? How we can describe the urinary nitrogen excretion levels are going high, right? There can be two explanations. The first one is the protein breakdown or the muscle wasting, and also low level of visceral proteins like prealbumins and albumins, right? And also with the tissue injury, lots of tissues are getting damaged, right? So that tissues are getting actually with increasing very few first few days to several weeks, depending on the extent of the tissue injury, there can be an increased protein breakdown, right? And also muscle wasting is there, so that the very low visceral proteins are get circulated in the blood, right? So all these, both of these facts will contribute to increase urinary nitrogen excretion, right? So when you talk about this nitrogen balance, it should be somehow related to the nitrogen excretion and nitrogen intake, right? So all the biochemical processes and metabolic processes are in favor of increase in the urinary nitrogen excretion, right? So increase the nitrogen loss via urine, right, will we end up with this kind of a negative nitrogen balance, right? So that depending on the degree of the tissue injury, right, very large nitrogen loss or an extensive nitrogen loss can be seen with a severe nitrogen imbalance with that patient, right? Somehow that even if that patient is diagnosed as a patient with tissue injury, right, we expect a negative nitrogen balance, and it should be cope up with the increased intake of good quality proteins in order to have a normal nitrogen balance, right? So this is all about it, right? So that do you have anything to ask now? Do you have any problem? Because I advise you all to write all the questions, right? Write all the questions and the answers to the questions, right? And since that you have enough time to do so, right? So that you can, when your write-ups are actually finished, you can, when you come to the faculty physically, you can show to one of our lecturers and get it be corrected, right? So that it will be helpful you, because at least just one paper should be done by a student, right? At least to know how you should write, right? So that better to start now because you have enough time, right? So when you come for the faculty physically, that you can collect all these things and get it be corrected by one of our lecturers, right? So we are happy to do it as well. So better to practice writing essay questions, because for the MCQs, right, there you have to know exactly the points, but the essay type question writing seems an important, because otherwise you cannot straight away like a stranger that you cannot write a very good answer at the exam. Just practice it at home, right, and come out with answer sheets so that we can correct them, right? So this is all about the tutorial, and there will be another tutorial in the next week as well. We will see how it goes. Do you have anything to ask? Okay, then we will finish the session, right? Okay, thank you.